Jake Morrison stood barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, making him the smallest person on the entire ship. Every morning when he walked through the corridors of the New Horizon, he felt like a child among giants. The other humans on the ship were all taller than him, but that was nothing compared to the aliens. The Zephyrians were huge, lizard-like creatures that stood 8 feet tall on their 2 legs. Their green scales caught the light as they moved, and their yellow eyes always seemed to be looking down at Jake with something that felt like disgust. The Vortani looked like walking crystals that hummed strange songs to each other. They were 7 feet tall, and their bodies made musical sounds when they walked. The Corvani were the worst of all. These alien warriors were massive, with thick, gray skin and muscles that bulged under their uniforms. The smallest Corvani was still twice Jake's size. Jake worked as the ship's xenobiologist, which meant he studied alien life forms. He was good at his job, really good, but nobody seemed to care about that. All they saw was his small size and weak-looking body. Captain Lisa Hart was the only one who treated him with respect, and even she was 5 inches taller than him. The ship had been flying through space for 3 months now, heading toward a planet called Kepler 442b. This was supposed to be a simple diplomatic mission, but Jake was starting to hate every day of it. The alien crew members made jokes about him constantly. They would pretend to look around for him. When he was standing right there or asked if he needed a boost to reach the control panels, Thrax was the worst of them all. The Corvani security chief was nearly 9 feet tall and built like a mountain. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together when he spoke. Every time Jake entered a room, Thrax would make some comment about humans being weak or pathetic. The other aliens always laughed when he did this. "Look, the tiny human approaches," Thrax said one morning as Jake walked into the main laboratory. "Be careful not to step on him, everyone. We might not find all the pieces." Zephyrian navigator. Seshith made a hissing sound that Jake had learned was their version of laughter. "Perhaps we should put him in a cage for his own safety," Sesh said, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. Jake felt his face get hot with anger, but he kept his mouth shut. He had learned that fighting back only made things worse. Instead, he walked to his workstation and started checking his equipment. Today they would reach the planet, and he had work to do. The planet Kepler 442b was covered in thick jungles and had an atmosphere that could support most known life forms. Jake had been studying the advanced data for weeks, and he had found something interesting. His instruments were picking up strange energy readings from the planet's surface, readings that suggested there might be a large predator species living there. "Captain Hart," Jake said during the morning briefing, "I think we should be careful when we land. My scans show signs of a possible apex predator on the planet." Captain Hart looked at Jake's data on her screen. She was a fair woman with short, brown hair and intelligent eyes. "What kind of predator are we talking about, Jake?" "I'm not sure exactly," Jake said. "But the energy pattern suggests something big, something that dominates its environment completely. The readings are unlike anything I've seen before." Thrax made a sound like a growl. "The tiny human is afraid of shadows again. There is no creature on that planet that a Corvani warrior cannot handle." Seshdesh hissed his agreement. "The small one sees danger where none exists. It is the way of weak creatures to fear everything." Jake felt his anger rise again, but Captain Hart held up her hand for silence. "We'll take proper precautions regardless," she said. "Thank you for the warning, Jake." But Jake could see that even Captain Hart didn't really believe him. She was just being polite. The other crew members were already dismissing his concerns and talking about how easy the mission would be. As the day went on, Jake heard more and more comments about his size and supposed weakness. During lunch, he overheard a group of Corvani warriors making bets about how long he would last on the planet's surface. They were wagering on whether he would survive a single day in the jungle. "I bet the tiny human runs back to the ship crying within an hour," one of them said. "You're being generous," another replied. "I say he won't even leave the landing site." Jake pretended he couldn't hear them, but every word cut deep. He had spent years studying alien biology, had earned advanced degrees in xenobiology and evolutionary science, and had scored in the top 5% of all Galactic Council examinations. But none of that mattered to these aliens. All they saw was a small, weak human who didn't belong among them. The worst part was that some of the other humans on the ship were starting to treat him the same way. They didn't want to be associated with the person everyone else mocked. Jake found himself eating alone more and more often, working by himself in the laboratory, and spending his free time in his small quarters. That evening, Jake was running final checks on his equipment when he overheard Thrax talking to a group of mixed alien crew members near the storage bay. "The humans claim to be a warrior species," Thrax was saying, "but look at their representative. Small, weak, afraid of his own shadow. If this is what humanity produces, they do not deserve their place on the Galactic Council." Perhaps it would be educational to leave him on the planet, Sesh H suggested with another hiss of laughter. "Let him face a real predator and see how long his human intelligence serves him." Jake gripped his datapad so hard his knuckles turned white. These aliens didn't just disrespect him personally, they were using him as an example to judge all of humanity. Every joke they made, every cruel comment reflected poorly on his entire species. He thought about reporting the harassment to Captain Hart, but he knew it would only make things worse. The aliens would just be more careful about hiding their contempt, and he would be seen as someone who couldn't handle the pressure of deep space missions. Instead, Jake made a different decision. He would prove them wrong. When they reached the planet tomorrow, he would show these aliens that size didn't matter. He would find evidence of the apex predator he had detected, and he would do it without their help. As Jake lay in his bunk that night, staring at the ceiling of his small quarters, he made a promise to himself. He would not let these aliens break his spirit. He was a scientist, a professional, and a representative of humanity. Whatever was waiting for them on Kepler 442b, he would face it with courage and intelligence. The ship's engines hummed quietly as they approached their destination. In a few hours, they would be in orbit around the jungle planet. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing with thoughts of the energy readings he had discovered. Something was down there in those jungles, something powerful and intelligent. He didn't know it yet, but that something was about to change his life forever. The aliens who mocked him for his small size were about to learn that in the vast universe, the most dangerous predators didn't always come in the largest packages. Tomorrow, Jake Morrison would take his first step into a jungle that would transform him from the ship's smallest crew member into something far more significant. But for now, he was just a lonely human trying to find his place among the stars, carrying the weight of his species' reputation on his small shoulders. The New Horizon landed on Kepler 442b just after dawn. Jake stood at the observation deck watching the thick jungle stretch out in all directions. The trees were massive, some reaching 300 feet into the sky, and the canopy was so dense that very little sunlight reached the ground below. Steam rose from the jungle floor, creating a misty atmosphere that made everything look mysterious and dangerous. Captain Hart called the crew together for their mission briefing. The plan was simple. They would establish a base camp near the landing site and then split into teams to explore different areas of the jungle. Jake was assigned to the geological survey team, which meant he would be studying rock formations and soil samples instead of looking for the life forms he had detected. "I want everyone to stay in radio contact at all times," Captain Hart said. "We don't know what's out there, so nobody goes anywhere alone." Thrax laughed his grinding laugh. "The only thing we need to worry about is making sure the tiny human doesn't get lost. Maybe we should tie a rope around him so he doesn't wander off." The other aliens found this hilarious. Even some of the humans smiled at the joke. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he kept quiet. He had already decided what he was going to do, and making a scene now would only make it harder. The team spent the first day setting up equipment and making basic surveys of the area around the landing site. Jake worked with his assigned team, but his mind was elsewhere. His instruments were picking up stronger energy readings now that they were on the planet's surface. Whatever was out there, it was definitely alive and definitely big. That evening, while the rest of the crew was eating dinner and sharing stories about their first day on the planet, Jake quietly gathered his personal scanning equipment. He had been planning this moment all day. He would slip away from the camp and follow the energy readings to their source. He would find proof of the apex predator he had detected, and then maybe the others would finally take him seriously. Jake waited until the night shift took over and most of the crew was asleep. The jungle was full of strange sounds, clicking, and buzzing and howling noises that seemed to come from everywhere at once. His heart was beating fast as he checked his equipment. One more time and then slipped away from the camp. The jungle was even more intimidating at night. Jake's flashlight beam seemed tiny against the massive trees and thick undergrowth. Every shadow could hide something dangerous, and every sound made him jump. But he forced himself to keep moving forward, following the readings on his scanner. The energy signals were getting stronger. Jake pushed through vines and thick bush, his small size actually helping him move through spaces that would have been impossible for the larger crew members. He was sweating heavily in the humid air, and his clothes were already soaked through. But he didn't stop. After an hour of walking, Jake found the first sign that something big lived in this jungle. There were claw marks on a tree trunk, gouged deep into the hard wood. The marks were huge, at least 6 inches long and spaced far apart. Whatever had made them was much larger than any earth animal Jake had ever seen. He took pictures of the claw marks and kept moving. His scanner was beeping more frequently now, indicating that he was getting close to the source of the energy. Readings. Jake's excitement was starting to overcome his fear. This was what he had come here to find. The next sign was even more dramatic. Jake found a clearing where the ground was marked with what looked like territorial markings. There were scratch marks in the dirt arranged in complex patterns, and a strong musky smell hung in the air. This wasn't just the sign of a big animal. This showed intelligence, planning, and social organization. Jake was taking more pictures when he heard something that made his blood freeze. It was a low growling sound, so deep he could feel it in his chest. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jake slowly turned around, his flashlight shaking in his trembling hand. At the edge of the clearing, 2 golden eyes reflected back at him. The eyes were huge, at least the size of dinner plates, and they were studying him with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the creature stepped into the light. It was like nothing Jake had ever seen before. The creature stood 12 feet tall when it rose up on its hind legs, but it could also move on all fours like a big cat. Its body was covered in dark fur that seemed to shimmer in the flashlight beam, and its face was a mix of reptilian and mammalian features. It had a long snout filled with sharp teeth, but its eyes showed the kind of intelligence that Jake had only seen in the most advanced species. The creature and Jake stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Jake's scientific training told him to run, but something deeper kept him frozen in place. This wasn't just a predator looking for food. This was a thinking being, studying him just as carefully as he was studying it. Slowly, very slowly, Jake reached for his scanner and pointed it at the creature. The readings were off the charts. This being was generating energy signatures that suggested not just physical power, but advanced brain activity. Jake was looking at a highly intelligent apex predator, something that had probably never been seen by any galactic species. The creature tilted its head to one side, watching Jake's movements. When Jake slowly pulled out his camera, the creature didn't attack. Instead, it seemed curious about the small human and his strange behavior. Jake took several pictures, the flash lighting up the clearing with each shot. After the 5th picture, the creature made a sound that was almost like a purr. It was a sound of curiosity, not aggression. Jake realized that this being was as interested in him as he was in it. Very carefully, Jake lowered his camera and took a step back. Showing that he wasn't a threat, the creature responded by lowering itself to all fours and moving closer. Jake could see the massive muscles under its fur, the way it moved with perfect balance and control. This was a perfect predator, built for hunting and killing, but it was choosing not to hurt him. Jake held his breath as the creature came within 10 feet of him. He could smell its scent now, wild and clean like the jungle itself. The creature's golden eyes never left his face, and Jake had the strange feeling that it was trying to communicate with him. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and melted back into the jungle. Jake heard its footsteps moving away, but within seconds there was only silence. If not for his pictures and the readings on his scanner, Jake might have thought he had imagined the whole encounter. Jake stood in the clearing for several more minutes, his heart still racing. He had just made first contact with an unknown intelligent species, and he had done it completely alone. The creature could have killed him easily, but instead it had chosen to study him, to try to understand what he was. The walk back to camp seemed to take forever. Jake kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see those golden eyes watching him from the shadows. But the jungle remained quiet except for the usual night sounds. When he finally reached the camp, everyone was still asleep. Jake slipped back into his quarters without anyone noticing he had been gone. As he lay in his bunk, Jake looked through the pictures he had taken. They were clear proof that an intelligent species lived on this planet, a species that had somehow remained hidden from galactic civilization. Tomorrow he would have to decide what to do with this information. He could report it to Captain Hart, but would anyone believe him? Or would they just assume that the small, mocked human was making up stories to get attention? Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to those golden eyes and the feeling that the creature had been trying to communicate with him. Something told him that this was just the beginning, that the mysterious being in the jungle had plans for him that he couldn't yet imagine. Jake could not stop thinking about the golden eyes. All through the next day, while he worked with his assigned team collecting soil samples and recording data, his mind kept returning to the creature he had met in the jungle. He had proof now, clear pictures and scanner readings, but he still had not decided what to do with them. The other crew members continued their usual behavior toward him. During lunch, Thrax made another joke about Jake's size, asking if they needed to make him a special chair so he could reach the table. Zephyrian crew members hissed their laughter, and even some of the humans smiled. Jake just ate his food quietly, but inside he was thinking about the intelligent being that had treated him with more respect than his own crewmates. That evening, Jake made his decision. He would go back to the jungle. The creature had not hurt him the first time, and Jake's scientific curiosity was stronger than his fear. He needed to learn more about this species, and he had a feeling that the creature wanted to learn about him too. Jake waited until the camp was quiet again, then gathered his equipment and slipped away into the jungle. This time he knew where he was going. He followed the same path he had taken the night before, moving carefully through the thick undergrowth. His small size helped him move quietly through the dense vegetation, and he was starting to understand why the creature had not heard him coming the first time. When Jake reached the clearing where he had first seen the creature, he was not surprised to find it waiting for him. The being was sitting on its haunches like a giant cat, its golden eyes watching the path Jake had taken. It was almost as if it had known he would return. This time, Jake was less afraid. He approached slowly, stopping about 20 feet away from the creature. They studied each other in silence for several minutes. Jake could see details he had missed before. The creature's fur was not just dark, but had patterns of different colors that would help it blend into the jungle shadows. Its hands had long fingers with sharp claws, but they were clearly designed for more than just hunting. This was a being that could make tools, create art, and build civilization. The creature made a soft sound, almost like a question. Jake realized it was trying to communicate with him. Very slowly, Jake pointed to himself and said, "Jake?" Then he pointed to the creature and tilted his head in a questioning gesture. The creature watched this carefully, then made a series of sounds that might have been its name. The sounds were complex, with clicks and growls that Jake could not hope to repeat, but he tried anyway. The creature seemed pleased with his attempt, making the purring sound Jake had heard before. Over the next hour, Jake and the creature began to develop a basic form of communication. The creature, which Jake started calling Korthek after the sounds it made, was clearly intelligent and curious about Jake's equipment. When Jake showed him the scanner, Korthek examined it carefully without touching it, as if he understood that it was delicate. Jake learned that Korthek was not alone. The creature made gestures toward the deeper jungle and communicated through sounds and movements that there were others like him. From what Jake could understand, they lived in organized groups and had been watching the ship since it landed. They knew about the human and alien crew members, but they had chosen to stay hidden. What surprised Jake most was how Korthak moved. Despite his massive size, the creature was incredibly graceful and quiet. He could disappear into the jungle, shadows within seconds, and when he moved through the undergrowth, he made almost no sound. Jake began to understand that this species had evolved to be perfect hunters. But they were also much more than that. On the third night, Korthak led Jake deeper into the jungle. They moved through areas that would have been impossible for the larger crew members to navigate. Jake's small size allowed him to follow paths that Korthak showed him, squeezing through gaps in the vegetation and climbing over fallen logs that would have blocked anyone taller. As they traveled, Jake began to notice something strange. He was moving through the jungle more quietly than he ever had before. Korthak seemed to be teaching him, showing him how to step to avoid making noise, how to use the shadows to stay hidden, and how to read the signs of the forest around them. Without realizing it, Jake was learning to move like a predator. They reached a series of caves hidden behind a waterfall. The caves were clearly artificial, carved from rock with tools and intelligence. This was not just a hiding place, but a home. Korthak led Jake through tunnels that opened into large chambers where other creatures like Korthak were waiting. Jake found himself in the presence of an entire family group. There were creatures of different sizes, from what looked like youngsters to ancient elders. They all watched Jake with the same golden eyes, studying him with intense curiosity. Jake realized that this was probably the first time any of them had seen a human up close. The largest of the creatures, an elderly female with silver streaks in her dark fur, approached Jake slowly. She moved with the dignity of a leader, and Jake understood that she was important to the group. She studied him for a long time, walking around him and examining him from every angle. Then she did something that surprised Jake completely. She reached out with one clawed hand and gently touched Jake's arm. Her touch was careful, almost gentle, as if she was afraid of hurting him. Then she made a series of sounds to the other creatures, and Jake heard something that sounded like approval in their responses. Over the following hours, Jake learned more about these beings than he had ever hoped to discover. They called themselves the Valdris, and they had been living on this planet for thousands of years. They had watched other spacefaring species come and go, but they had never revealed themselves because they found most aliens to be too clumsy, too loud, and too disrespectful of the natural world. The Valdris were not just hunters, but philosophers and scientists in their own right. They had developed advanced understanding of their planet's ecosystem, and they had created a society based on respect for the environment and careful use of resources. They valued intelligence, stealth, and the ability to move through the world without disturbing it. What amazed Jake most was how the Valdris seemed to view him. Unlike his crewmates, who saw only his small size and physical weakness, the Valdris saw something different. They watched the way he moved, the way he observed his surroundings, and the way he showed respect for their home. To them, Jake was not weak or inferior. He was something they recognized. The elderly female, who Jake learned was named Zaris, made a decision that would change everything. She gestured for Jake to follow her to a special chamber deep in the caves. On the walls of this chamber were carved images showing the history of the Valdris people. The carvings showed great hunts, important ceremonies, and the faces of legendary leaders. Zaris pointed to one section of the wall and made sounds that Jake was beginning to understand. She was telling him about the qualities that the Valdris valued most. Not size or strength, but intelligence, awareness, and the ability to think like a hunter. She was explaining that these qualities were what made someone truly Valdris. Then, Zaris did something that shocked Jake to his core. She placed her hand on his shoulder and spoke a word that Korthak had taught him meant brother or family. The other Valdris in the chamber made sounds of agreement and approval. Jake realized that he was being accepted into their group, not as a guest or an outsider, But as one of them, as Jake sat in the cave surrounded by these magnificent beings, he understood that his life had changed forever. The crew members who mocked him for his size had no idea what they were missing. The Valdris saw in Jake something that his own species had failed to recognize. They saw a hunter, a thinker, and a being worthy of respect when Jake finally returned. To camp that night, he carried with him a new understanding of himself and his place in the universe. The small human that everyone laughed at had found a family among the most perfect predators in the galaxy. And somehow Jake knew that this was only the beginning of his transformation. Jake had been disappearing into the jungle for 5 nights in a row. He thought he was being careful, but Captain Hart was starting to notice. During the morning briefing on the 6th day, she pulled him aside after the other crew members had left. "Jake, is everything all right?" Captain Hart asked, her voice showing genuine concern. "You've seemed tired lately, and some of the crew mentioned they haven't seen you around in the evenings." Jake felt panic rise in his throat. He could not tell Captain Hart about the Valdris, not yet. They had trusted him with their secret, and he would not betray that trust. "I'm fine, Captain. Just having trouble sleeping in the jungle environment. I've been taking walks to clear my head." Captain Hart studied his face carefully. "Just be careful out there, Jake. We don't know what kind of dangers might be lurking in that jungle." If only she knew, Jake thought. But he just nodded and promised to be more careful. The conversation worried him, though. If Captain Hart was starting to ask questions, it would not be long before others noticed his absence too. That afternoon, Jake's fears proved correct. While he was working at his station, he overheard Thrax talking to a group of Corvani warriors near the equipment storage area. "The tiny human has been acting strange," Thrax was saying in his grinding voice. "He disappears every night and returns looking exhausted. Perhaps the jungle environment is too much for his weak human constitution." One of the other Corvani laughed. "Maybe he got lost and is too embarrassed to admit it. Humans have such poor sense of direction. Or maybe something in the jungle scared him so badly that he cannot sleep," suggested another. "The small ones are always afraid of shadows." Jake felt anger building in his chest, but he also felt something else. After spending time with the Valdris, he was starting to see these aliens differently. They were loud, clumsy, and completely unaware of their surroundings. When they moved through the jungle, they crashed through the undergrowth like machines, showing no respect for the environment around them. The Valdris were right to avoid contact with species like these. That evening, Jake decided to take a different approach. Instead of sneaking away after everyone was asleep, he would tell Korthik about the problems he was facing. The Valdris had accepted him as family, and families helped each other with difficulties. Jake found Korthik waiting for him in their usual meeting place. The great creature seemed to sense that something was wrong, making concerned sounds and gestures. Jake tried to explain using the communication system they had developed over the past few days. He pointed back toward the camp and made sounds that indicated trouble. Korthik understood immediately. He had been watching the camp from a distance, and he had seen how the other crew members treated Jake. The Valdris had excellent hearing and eyesight, and they had witnessed the daily humiliation that Jake endured. Korthik made angry sounds and showed his teeth, clearly upset that his new family member was being mistreated. Jake tried to calm Korthik down, but the large creature was already moving deeper into the jungle. Jake followed, and within minutes they were back at the cave complex where the Valdris lived. Korthik immediately went to find Zaris, the elderly female leader. When Zaris heard what was happening, she became very serious. She gathered the other adult Valdris, and they had a long discussion in their complex language. Jake could not understand most of what they were saying, but he could tell they were angry and concerned. Finally, Zaris turned to Jake and made it clear that the Valdris had made a decision. They would not allow their new family member to be treated badly by the clumsy aliens. If necessary, they would reveal themselves to protect Jake. Jake tried to explain that this was not necessary, that he could handle the situation himself, but the Valdris had already made up their minds. They had accepted Jake as one of their own, and they protected their family members. The next morning, Jake's worst fears came true. He woke up to find Captain Hart standing over his bunk with a concerned expression. Behind her stood Thrax and several other crew members. "Jake, we need to talk," Captain Hart said firmly. "Thrax says you've been leaving the camp at night. That's against safety protocols, and I need to know what's going on." Jake sat up slowly, his mind racing. He could lie and deny everything, but he could see from their faces that they already knew the truth. "I've been doing some additional research," he said carefully. "Following up on those energy readings I detected." Thrax made his grinding laugh. "The tiny human has been wandering around the jungle at night, probably getting lost and scared. This is what happens when you put weak creatures in dangerous situations." "That's enough, Thrax," Captain Hart said sharply. Then she turned back to Jake. "What kind of research requires you to go out alone at night?" "That's extremely dangerous and completely against protocol." Jake knew he had to tell them something, but he could not reveal the truth about the Valdris. "I've been tracking the source of the energy readings. I think there might be a large predator species on this planet that we haven't discovered yet." "A predator?" Captain Hart looked skeptical. "Jake, if there was a dangerous predator in this area, our sensors would have detected it." "You're letting your imagination run wild." Seshith, the Zephyrian navigator, made his hissing laugh. "The small human sees monsters in every shadow. This is why his species should not be trusted with important missions." Jake felt his anger rising. But before he could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the camp. The communications officer, a human named Pete Collins, came running over to Captain Hart. "Captain, we've got a problem," Pete said, breathing hard. "Our perimeter sensors are picking up movement all around the camp. Something big is out there, and there are multiple contacts." Captain Hart's face went pale. "How many contacts?" "At least 30, maybe more. They're surrounding us, but they're staying just outside our sensor range. Whatever they are, they're smart enough to avoid direct detection." Thrax immediately began barking orders to his security team. "All warriors, prepare for battle. We are under attack by unknown hostiles." Jake felt his heart sink. The Valdris had come to protect him, but the crew was interpreting their presence as a threat. This was exactly what he had been afraid of. Two groups that could have been friends were about to become enemies because of a misunderstanding. "Wait," Jake said, stepping forward. "Don't attack. They're not hostile." Thrax turned on him with fury in his eyes. "You know what these creatures are? Have you been in contact with them?" Before Jake could answer, the jungle around the camp came alive with movement. Valdris warriors emerged from the shadows, moving with perfect silence and grace. They surrounded the camp completely, but they made no aggressive moves. They simply stood there, watching and waiting. Jake could see Korthik among them, his golden eyes focused on the group around Jake. The great creature was clearly ready to fight if necessary, but he was also waiting for Jake's signal. Captain Hart stared at the Valdris in amazement. "My God, they're magnificent." "Jake, these are the predators you detected, aren't they?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, Captain. But they're not just predators. They're intelligent, more intelligent than we imagined, and they're not here to attack us." "Then why are they here?" Captain Hart asked. Jake looked at the faces of his crewmates, seeing fear and confusion in their eyes. Then he looked at the Valdris, seeing strength and loyalty in their golden gazes. The two worlds he had been living in were about to collide, and he was the only one who could prevent a disaster. "They're here because of me," Jake said quietly. "They've accepted me as part of their family, and they came to protect me." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Thrax began to laugh, a sound like grinding stones. "The tiny human thinks he has been adopted by monsters. This is what happens when weak minds are exposed to too much stress." But Captain Hart was not laughing. She was studying the Valdris with the eyes of an experienced officer, and she could see the intelligence in their movements and positioning. These were not mindless beasts. They were sophisticated warriors who had outmaneuvered her entire crew. "Jake," she said slowly, "I think you and I need to have a very long conversation." Captain Hart called for an emergency meeting in the center of the camp. The Valdris remained in their positions around the perimeter, watching but not advancing. Jake stood between the two groups, feeling the weight of both worlds on his shoulders. "Jake, I need you to explain everything," Captain Hart said, her voice calm but firm. "Start from the beginning." Jake took a deep breath and began to tell his story. He explained about the energy readings he had detected, his unauthorized trips into the jungle, and his first contact with Korthek. He described the Valdris civilization, their intelligence, and their reasons for staying hidden from galactic society. The crew listened with growing amazement. The aliens who had mocked Jake for his size and weakness were now hearing that he had accomplished something none of them could have imagined. He had made first contact with a species that had remained hidden for thousands of years. "You're telling us that these creatures accepted you as family?" Captain Hart asked, looking at the Valdris warriors who surrounded them. "Yes," Jake replied. "They saw something in me that my own crewmates couldn't see. They judged me by my actions and intelligence, not by my size." Thrax made a sound of disbelief. "These are savage beasts. They cannot possibly understand concepts like family or acceptance." As if responding to his words, Korthek stepped forward from the jungle. The massive Valdris moved with perfect grace, stopping just outside the camp's perimeter. He looked directly at Thrax and made a series of sounds that clearly indicated disapproval. "Korthek understands every word you're saying," Jake said quietly. "The Valdris have been listening to galactic languages for centuries. They know more about us than we know about them." Captain Hart studied Korthek carefully. "Can you communicate with them, Jake? Can you arrange a formal meeting?" Jake nodded and walked toward Korthek. The crew watched nervously as the small human approached the massive predator. But Korthek's posture immediately became gentle and welcoming. He made soft sounds of greeting and touched Jake's shoulder with one clawed hand. Jake spoke with Korthek in the mixture of sounds and gestures they had developed. After several minutes of conversation, Jake turned back to Captain Hart. "Korthek says that Xeris, their leader, will meet with you, but it has to be on their terms, in their sacred place, and only a small group can come." Captain Hart nodded. "I'll bring myself, Jake, and 2 others. Will that be acceptable?" Korthek made approving sounds, but then he did something that surprised everyone. He pointed directly at Thrax and made harsh sounds that clearly indicated rejection. "He says Thrax cannot come," Jake translated. "The Valdris have been watching us since we arrived. They've seen how Thrax treats me, and they don't trust him." Thrax's face darkened with anger. "I will not be judged by animals. If there is to be a meeting, I will attend as security chief." Korthek's response was immediate and terrifying. The massive Valdris rose to his full height and made a sound that was part growl, part roar. Every other Valdris around the camp responded with similar sounds. The message was clear: Thrax was not welcome. "I think we should respect their wishes," Captain Hart said quickly. "Jake, Pete, and Dr. Williams will come with me. Everyone else stays here." 2 hours later, the small group followed Korthek into the jungle. Jake led the way, moving with the silent grace he had learned from the Valdris. Captain Hart and the others struggled to keep up, their larger size making it difficult to navigate the dense undergrowth. When they reached the cave complex, Jake felt a sense of homecoming. This place had become more familiar to him than his own quarters on the ship. Xeris was waiting for them in the main chamber. Surrounded by other Valdris leaders, the meeting that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Xeris spoke in perfect galactic standard, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. She explained that the Valdris had been watching the galactic community for generations, waiting for a species that could understand their values. "Most species are too large, too clumsy, too loud," Xeris said, her golden eyes fixed on Captain Hart. "They move through the universe like conquerors, taking what they want without respect for the natural order. We have watched your crew, and most of them fit this pattern." Captain Hart listened respectfully. "But Jake is different?" "Jake moves like a hunter," Xeris replied. "He thinks before he acts, observes before he judges, and shows respect for the world around him. These are the qualities we value most. Size and strength mean nothing without wisdom and respect." Dr. Williams, the ship's anthropologist, leaned forward with excitement. This is incredible. Your species has developed a completely different approach to civilization. You've chosen harmony over dominance, Zaris nodded approvingly. The doctor understands. This is why we have decided to reveal ourselves now. Jake has shown us that some galactic species can learn our ways. Then Zaris stood and walked to Jake. She placed both hands on his shoulders and spoke in the formal Valdris language. Jake's eyes widened with surprise and emotion. What did she say? Captain Hart asked. Jake's voice was shaky with emotion. She said I am no longer just family. She's naming me Huntkin, which means I have the full rights and responsibilities of a Valdris adult. It's the highest honor they can give. But Zaris was not finished. She continued speaking in Valdris, her voice carrying the weight of ceremony. Other Valdris in the chamber began to respond, their voices joining in what was clearly a ritual chant. She's doing more than that, Jake said, tears in his eyes. She's declaring me truekin. No outsider has ever been given that title in Valdris. History. Korthik stepped forward and added his voice to the ceremony. He spoke directly to Jake, his words carrying deep meaning that Jake translated for the others. Korthik says that I am no longer the small human who was mocked by giants. I am Jake of the Valdris, and I carry the strength of the greatest hunters in the galaxy. He says that anyone who disrespects me disrespects the entire Valdris nation. Captain. Hart watched the ceremony with growing understanding. Jake, do you realize what this means? You've just become an ambassador between two civilizations. The ceremony continued for an hour, with each Valdris leader accepting Jake as truekin. When it was over, Zaris made an announcement that would change everything. We will no longer hide from the galaxy, she said. Jake has shown us that some species can learn to respect the natural order. We will begin limited contact with the galactic community, but Jake will be our voice in your world. The journey back to the camp was quiet, everyone processing what they had witnessed. When they arrived, Jake was surprised to find the crew waiting with a new attitude. Word had spread about the ceremony, and even the aliens who had mocked him were now looking at him with something approaching respect. Thrax was the last to approach. The massive Corvani warrior stood before Jake, his expression uncertain. I have been informed that you now speak for the apex predators of this world, Thrax said slowly. I may have misjudged you. Jake looked up at the giant warrior who had made his life miserable for months. But instead of anger, Jake felt something else. He had learned from the Valdris that true strength came from wisdom, not revenge. The Valdris judge people by their actions, not their words, Jake said quietly. If you want their respect, you'll have to earn it. Over the following days, everything changed. The crew began to see Jake not as the smallest and weakest among them, but as someone who had accomplished something impossible. He had gained the trust and acceptance of the most perfect predators in the galaxy. The Valdris began to work with the human crew, sharing knowledge and establishing the foundations of a new relationship between their species and the galactic community. Jake found himself at the center of it all. No longer the mocked outsider, but the bridge between two worlds. Captain Hart's final report to Galactic Command would make history. She wrote about the discovery of the Valdris and their unique civilization. But most importantly, she wrote about Jake Morrison, the small human who had proven that true strength comes from intelligence, respect, and the courage to see beyond surface appearances. As Jake stood in the jungle clearing where he had first met Korthak, surrounded by his new family of apex predators, he smiled. The crew who had mocked him for his size now understood that he had been claimed by the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy. Not as prey, but as kin. The smallest human had become something far greater than anyone had imagined. He had become the voice of the hunters, the bridge between worlds, and proof that in the vast universe, the most dangerous predators don't always come in the largest packages.